Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are continuing our Lonely Sci-Fi month, which I think this is, if any of them summed up the title best, it would be this book, Traveling to Mars by Mark Russell and Roberto Meli. Meli?
I was saying Meli.
Meli. Meli. Yeah. Meli sounds right.
Yeah.
I'd say my only complaint about it is the inconsistent drawing of a guitar on the front cover. There's only 3 strings at the bottom, but there are 4 strings strung up at the top. So somewhere there's a string disappearing. But guitars are hard.
They're tough. There's a lot of detail there. It's much easier to draw the idea of a guitar than a guitar itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, this book, as we mentioned a couple weeks ago in the Zero, is from Ablaze Comics. It's 11 issues, which is interesting. I don't know, how did you reread this, or how have you read it? Because when I read it initially, when it was coming out, or as it was coming out, I came to it a little late. I read it in single issue, but for this reread, I went back and got the trade paperback. There's also a deluxe hardcover that I think came out recently that I believe was part of the Kickstarter when this thing first came out, and I think it took about 2.5 years for I think the Kickstarter awards finally just came out. But it was interesting. In the back of the trade, they had part of Mark Russell's original pitch for the book, and it was supposed to be 12 issues. It was meant to be 12 issues for a story. We ultimately only got 11. This is a book, though, that I can't imagine like what the other issue would be. Like what that, like it wouldn't be one on the end. It'd be something in the middle probably. But I don't know what happened in there. At what point it went from like, we're just going to lose an issue here. Because story wise, theme wise, I don't think you lose anything. Right. An extra issue just gives you probably more time on the ship, maybe, or more time. I don't know what it would be, but it was interesting to see that in there and know that in his initial conception of this, there was one more issue. I just don't know what it would be. Like, I don't know how much more there was to explore with the character and the situation and everything like that. It seemed like he got through everything that he was trying to get to. I didn't feel like there were any loose ends, I guess, in terms of
that's
what
how
was
I
presented.
Feel. I could see there being a coda last issue where you assume Roy has passed away. You follow Candace on Earth for a few pages, see how she's dealing with the world as it is. You follow his mom for a few pages. You follow the Beef Corp when their drills land and they realize there's no fuel there. And then you follow the robots having made their exodus across the plains of Mars. And I'm like, I think it would kind of be artistic and interesting, but I think he probably realized that would suggest that the book was about the world instead of being about Roy.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, to answer your question, first of all, I read the first 5 issues in single issue as they came out. Then I lost track of it. Classic story on this podcast for me. Yeah. Read it this time all single issues digitally because that was the cheapest way to acquire it. But I will say with only mild hesitation that this, having now read the entire thing and having chewed on it and returned to it, I'm going to say that this is a top 10 favorite comic for me of all time.
Wow, of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly my favorite Mark Russell, and I think Mark Russell is just crazy good. But I think like the pearls of wisdom in this, I would read in any medium. Like if this was a book of poetry about end of life, I would read it and love it. If this was an essay that he wrote with basically all the same quotes and thoughts and ideas, I would read that. And it takes it to the next level that he did it as a comic. And the story is not just, kind of a half-assed exposition dump, but it's a meaningful story as well. Like it didn't even need to be for me, but the fact that it was a good story that had twists and turns and surprises. It had my favorite spaceship battle of all time.
Which is essentially a non-battle. Yeah,
I know. But it was like it's such a great point, and just float out there, just knock them slightly off course, And it's like that's the spaceship battle. I'm like, can you imagine how disappointing Star Wars would be if George Lucas were constrained to these rules? Uh,
That's interesting. I want to come back to that. I want to say this. So when you said you read the first like 5 issues or whatever, were you reading those as they came out? Because there were some delays on the back end of this book. I think like
right. I think the first time it
went from started in end of '02 and it finished up at the beginning of '04. So it was almost like a year and a half to get out 11 issues, which isn't like the craziest thing in comics. But so you were reading it when it first came out.
Yes, I was reading it when it first came out, and I think what was this 21, 22,
22, late 22, early 23. Yeah.
Were we podcasting by then?
Yes.
I think we were. Yeah.
I don't know. When was your daughter born?
22.
So yes.
Summer of 22.
So yes.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Good benchmark.
Yeah.
But
because this is a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think I want to shout out. I did not pre-order this. This was I saw the iconic Steve Ray Vaughan Stratocaster on the cover, plop down on Mars. And I was like, Mark Russell, I think I know him. Not like I would come to know him about a year later when we did Flintstones and Not All Robots, but I had read Not All Robots and I liked it. And I was like, this guy really loves robots. And what you learn is that he really loves anthropomorphic non-human characters, whether they are robots or Flintstones appliances.
But he likes to use that as a way to comment on humanity.
Yeah, I mean that's ostensibly what they're for.
Yeah.
Not to minimize them, but he's very, very good at making humanity feel small by using these not inanimate but non-human objects to comment on us.
Yeah, that's true. Then they wouldn't qualify as an enemy. Yeah, generally non-sentient in that way. I mean I came to this book incredibly late. I'm someone who, I knew Mark Russell. I had read Prez. I had read Flintstones, but he wasn't someone I think at this point I had read at least the first volume of Second Coming. So I had read a number of stuff, but this wasn't a book that was on my radar. I think it was our mutual friend, Andy Hazinga, who I think when we did the car episode, the three of us on the way up to GalaxyCon in 23. I want to say this book was probably on Andy's list, and I had not read it. I was aware at that point. I think I was aware of it. I knew it was a Mark Russell book, but I had not read it. And it wasn't until probably I think at that point 10 issues had been out or 9 issues had been out, and it was early 24 when it finally came out.
By the time you're getting the Eisner winner medallion stamped on each issue.
Yeah, or
because after its first year, it won.
Eisner nominated. It didn't win. It was Eisner nominated.
I thought it won best new limited series or something like that.
I think it was nominated for I think at least limited series and maybe new series. I don't believe it won. But I basically didn't come to it until like when issue 11 came out. When issue 11 had come out finally in April of 24, I had read the previous 10. So like I had caught up until that point, and then read the final one. But yeah, this was it's tough to unseat Flintstones for me in terms of like a specific Mark Russell ranking, because I am the person that if you ask me my favorite thing from a creator or any kind of artist, 90% of the time, it's the first thing I saw from them, 100%. Or heard from them.
I'm the same with musicians. The first album I heard is my favorite.
Whether or not that is the artist's first album or
correct,
their quote. It's the first one I heard.
Like,
it's the reason I like it. Yeah, it's the reason I like this thing.
The Metallica Black album was the first Metallica album I ever got or heard, and I just spent a lot of time poring over the songs, only to realize like most Metallica fans consider that to be the turning point where they went mainstream. And it's like, they got Bob Rock as the producer, and it was like, oh man, they sold out. I'm like, it's freaking rocks. And now I'm like, objectively, I like the earlier albums better, but there is just this warm blanket and soft spot for me. with the
it's
blackout
such a
one.
basic answer for something like that. But again, if that's the reason that gets you into an artist or an actor or a writer, or whatever it is, like that becomes the benchmark for everything else. No matter how good something else is afterwards, even if it is maybe just considered objectively better work, in your mind, it's always going to be compared to that. And so for me, that is Flintstones, because I read Flintstones and that like melted my brain. But I don't know. This wouldn't go into my top 10 all time like that. But this is, I think,
Well, you also have a much wider pool
I
of things to pick your top 10 from.
I
And at
do,
this
I
point,
do.
like the probability of a new thing coming out and dislodging something in your top 10,
It's
I
pretty
would think
low.
it's pretty low.
It's pretty
Whereas
low. It's
mine is
pretty low.
much more fluid.
I will say though, I think this is kind of like the apex for him in terms of like everything he's done
This is the Mark Russelliest.
leading up to
Yeah.
this, like in terms of, I think we mentioned this when we did Flintstones and Auto Robots, like like he's the best satirist in comics. He is doing a thing better in this medium than anybody else, any other writer, I think. He has a way of turning his pen on humanity in some fashion. All the books he does that we've talked about, other books like Billionaire Island, Rumpus Room, whatever it is, whatever he's trying to take down, whatever he's trying to comment on, he has the sharpest pen, the sharpest outlook on it. And with Traveling to Mars here, this is one where, similar to Flintstones, he's turning that lens on all of humanity. Like some of his books, like like Billionaire Island, Rumpus Room, he's turning that pen on billionaires and on a very specific set of elites in the world, which for a lot of creators, like not the hardest target to hit. Like it's pretty
Right.
easy to mock and satirize that, but with something like this, with something like Not All Robots, being able to reflect that back on all of humanity and finding a setting in which to do that. And I think something something that you mentioned in the Zero when we briefly touched on this, the story presentation here, the fact that it's a journal, that our
Yeah.
character Roy is writing his thoughts down. And so much of like very little actually happens. You mentioned the space battle, right? In so much that you can call it a battle.
I mean, that's what I loved about it. It was like,
but in a more traditional comic, in any sort of space thing, he is building up towards an encounter, right? Like, oh my God, our guy is out in space and all these other ships are coming after him. Something is going to happen. And yet effectively nothing happens, because that's not what the story is about. It's like nothing actually happens in the book. It's all people talking to other people or people talking to robots and what's inside Roy's head. So this whole book, all 11 issues, you're just sitting in Roy's thoughts. And you're using him and his situation to comment on life and death and living and society and the way we look at ourselves and look at the world, all these like larger existential things that are prevalent in all of Mark Russell's stuff. But I think this is like this is probably the highest level of like fully realized kind of criticism and commentary. And I think that's the result of all the previous books he's done before. It's like he took all those different aspects, all the lessons he learned, and he funnels them all into this book. And so I think that you just get absolute peak social commentary from Mark Russell and his writing.
yeah, I think what impresses me so much about him in a book like this is I think a lot of lesser writers could say basically the same things about society, but would come off so holier than thou, so superior sounding. And when Mark turns his pen on humanity, that includes himself. And like he's part of the problem, and he has not given us this like morally robust, intellectually superior character. He gave us a hillbilly who was a manager, assistant manager at a pet store.
I think you just said it right there, that there's no moralizing in his books. You know, he is shining a light back, um, in a way where, you know, the reader's left to judge in, you know, in terms of who are the quote unquote good people, who are the bad people. But he's not saying this is a right or wrong way to live or not live. He's not looking down upon anyone and being like, screw all this. He's simply commenting and noticing. He's shining a light on it and saying like, hey, this is the human experience. You know, this is reality.
It's
here.
not
Yeah.
Tribal. He's not saying those are the bad guys over there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And our team is safe.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like
He's saying collectively, maybe we're not all that great. And he's also not saying, I don't got all the answers. I'm not writing this from a character who's like, I'm superior to these people because I have all the answers. I know what's right. He's simply looking back on everybody. He puts a character out there that is, I hate this term, but he's the guy asking questions. That's all Roy does. Roy has no answers. He's not equipped to have the answers. He's not in a position to get answers. But he's in a position to be reflective on things. And so he's putting all this down and reflecting back on his life, and as a result, reflecting back on humanity of just like, how did we get here? Like, what is this? What does any of this mean? And yeah, Mark Russell as a writer isn't very interested in giving those answers. I think he wants the reader to sit with those. You know, I think you talked about all the just the quotable moments, the lines, the one-liners, everything that the voice that he gives Roy, and all those journal entries about reflecting on his life, and then, you know, but reflecting on the specific moments in his life, which allowed the reader to reflect on those moments in their own lives. There's so much good stuff there. There's so many incredible one-liners that, you know, yeah, you could sit on one page and examine what Roy wrote on that and like get a dissertation out of it, you know?
Yeah.
Just examining one question, one facet of something that Roy wrote in his diary.
Well, and then when he switches voices and you see, you know, the letter from Candace, like, it's good writing because I can tell that's not Roy's voice.
Yeah.
But they're speaking in the same world. And, you know, things that his father would say to him in his own memory, which, you know, some of that is clearly colored by Roy's perception and emotions around things. Yeah.
I think same thing when the scenes when he's in church as a boy, you know, it's not meant to be that preacher was saying exactly that, but you're getting the idea of what he's saying, right?
Yeah. Chief shout out to Presbyterians.
That was funny.
That's accurate.
Presbyterians just catching strays. Catching strays here. But yeah. I think all those memories, anything from his childhood or even from his young adulthood, right? Like when he's in the band, gets kicked out, like all those are meant to be, I guess you could take them as literal. I didn't take them as literal. I took them as just being, again, it's a memory. So it's about the sense and the vibe of, you get a sense of what Roy is feeling, what Roy's place is in the world, and how he sees himself in relation to other people, right? His town, his community, his parents, Candace, all this, the pet shop, all, you know, we're just getting a sense of what's there. And it's almost like the specifics to me didn't really matter so much. It was all about you understanding of how he was or was not connecting with people, because it's him reflecting on it. It's him looking back on it now, several years, you know, many decades later, and knowing, based on how he's been writing in the journal, that he's looking back on all of it with some level of regret.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I could just go through this and like, I think I said in the zero, this is like, I'm a big like underliner, note taker, margin writer, and I've never done that in a comic, but I've never wanted to more than in this book. And I was going to say that it's almost the one positive thing about Kindle's takeover of Comixology is that I could actually do that if I wanted to,
Oh, can you
using the
highlight and
built-in
stuff?
Kindle functions. I think I
Oh,
could add a note to a page. I don't think I could highlight because it doesn't recognize text
yeah, the
because,
recognized text. That's what I was. Yeah, that's what I was getting
handwritten
at.
text. Right.
Yeah.
But I could add notes to myself. Um, and yeah. So, but let's just talk about the beats of the story for a moment.
Sure.
I know we're not a beat recap podcast, but I think there are interesting beats here because I think he knows that the most incredible part of the story, like the biggest suspension of disbelief, is not that the world is ending or that there's gas on Mars, which when I started reading, I was like, yeah, whatever, like that.
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't have found it by now if it was there, which is, sets up a great twist. But it's that, the government or corporations would have just found this one random guy. It's like,
Yeah.
there's got to be a million Roy Livingstons who are
Yeah.
meet this criteria of they don't have anything to live for, especially if the planet's literally dying. No one has anything to live for.
Yeah.
They could have had a bunch of people volunteer for this. So picking him out of the crowd, I think, is the most incredulous part. Yet, Mark makes it believable enough for the story he's trying to tell. Like, this isn't hard sci-fi. He doesn't need to convince you beyond the shadow of a doubt that, like, yeah, this is absolutely what would happen. Roy would get picked. But they were like, the corporation doesn't want an American hero who's going to like step up and volunteer because they might not have corporate loyalty. They may have something else,
Yeah.
like they want someone who they can manipulate and manipulate
Yeah.
easily, someone who they don't have to convince for suicide because they've already attempted it or, are close to it. Yet someone that is mentally stable enough to make it there. So it's
Yeah.
like, this is thin criteria. And once you accept that, it's like, okay, that's a smaller pool. And then basically you just have to grant that, well, they just picked one person out of that pool.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
essentially, he won a lottery out of that pool, rather than being the only man in America who met this criteria.
What this reminded me of very weirdly, and maybe not, have you ever seen Joe versus the Volcano?
I haven't, but not from beginning to end.
It is objectively the best Tom Hanks Meg Ryan rom-com pair up. And I'll take that.
Wow.
That's a hill I will
Wow.
die on. But it's a similar thing. Tom Hanks plays this character with just this terrible job, who is picked because he has to go to some remote island and be a human sacrifice, because the company he works for needs to trade with this like indigenous culture or whatnot, and so he's convinced. Basically, he goes to the doctor, and the doctor is in on this, and he tells him that he is dying. He basically tells him he has a terminal illness. And part of this is like for like a week or so, he has like an unlimited budget. He goes and like stays in the fanciest hotels, has this lavish, everything like that. And ultimately it doesn't happen there, but it's the same kind of idea of like, we got to find this person with literally nothing to live for that we can convince to do this, because they are malleable enough to do that, but they're not asking enough questions to upend some master plan. Now that we're not led to believe that in this case, there was though, because of Joe versus the Volcano. When I first read this, there was a part of me that was like, does Roy have cancer? Like in that first
That's dark.
Because in that first meeting, I think when I initially read it, I didn't read it in the way that it's actually written. Because my mind was already twisted in that way. Roy states that they came to him soon after he found out. It wasn't that these people came to him and told him he has cancer, which is how I initially read it. That the company came to him, and he's the kind of person that'd be like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I have cancer, like, you know what I'm saying? Like that kind of makes him a sadder sack case. But that's in my mind because Joe versus Volcano was a cinematic masterpiece. Because I thought that initially, I was like, oh, that's really, and also it's Mark Russell, right? And so there's something sinister about that. And so, this is early in the first issue. When you get to that point, I'm now thinking the story is going to be, he gets to Mars, and on the way there, he realizes he's not dying. you know, and the story then is it obviously would be radically different. The story is about then his self-realization of I want to live and going against the corporation, yada yada yada. Obviously, we didn't get that book because I read that wrong, but initially, the first time I absolutely distinctly remember reading that, thinking, oh, he's being set up. And traveling to Mars isn't about going to Mars and dying. It's about this guy like reaching the full activization and realization of his life and understanding what life meaning is. And I guess we do get that still, but in a way that, no, this guy's actually like, he actually does the thing he's supposed to do. He does the thing that he was hired to do. And he does die, you know, and it actually becomes immaterial whether or not he has cancer or not, because he doesn't die of that. They only give him enough oxygen to last on the surface of Mars for 3 days or whatever it was. So that actually becomes,
he finds it's enough time to get bored.
Yeah.
Which
yeah,
what was
yeah.
it, like an hour? And I was like, oh my God, that's me on every vacation.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
anytime people take me into nature and they're like, isn't it gorgeous? I'm like an hour in and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go get a book.
It's a tree, isn't it?
Yep.
But yeah, no, so it was an interesting experience for me to read it and to kind of have that realization of where the story was going, being in a very different place that I had already mapped out in my head. And to be surprised in that way. And again, I shouldn't be with the amount of Mark Russell work that I've read, this idea that, I think part of the way, going back to what we talked about a little earlier about how when he does shine his satirical light, his commentary light back on humanity, not only does he not do it from like a moralist viewpoint, from a high horse viewpoint, he juxtaposes it with like the absurd. So it's like he undercuts you or sets you up with these absurd situations or ridiculous scenarios. And so when he comes in with the hammer of like deep introspective existential crisis and thought and deliberation, like it lands that much harder.
Yeah. Well, so the thing that really got me about his writing in this one, that the first time you're reading, you know, you don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the first big twist that really knocked me off my horse, so to speak, was the woman who comes in and claims that they have Candace hostage and she's from another corporation. Because in the hands of a lesser writer, that's now what the book's about, is him on the ship for the rest of the thing, trying to figure out like, how do I manipulate these corporations while I'm literally drifting away, dying? Which is an interesting story, but not the story he set out to tell.
It's a completely different story. Exactly.
And I could see like, it feels like the type of thing that like Aaron Sorkin would have to throw the studio a bone every once in a while. This is like, he got a studio note of like, what if one time the first lady's plane crashes and she dies, and then Bart like gets a date for a season, and he took that note and turned it into Angel Maintenance, which is just one where the front wheel of the Air Force One won't go down, and so they're doing a bottle episode, which is arguably smaller than the regular episode in the White House set. So it's like he took. They were like, oh, like writing these teasers for the episode, like, is the president's plane going to crash out of the sky? Is it going to do this, or this? And instead, it's just him doing normal White House stuff on the plane, being impatient with it, ready to land. And that's what that felt like. And then the same with, the next twist of like, oh, now it's a race to Mars. Or he has to find a way to speed up his ship and outrun these other ships. That's just one issue. Like it doesn't take over the series. So I like the restraint. I like the, like, there is an episode of the week, like Scooby-Doo type formula to the story itself, while the journal keeps going basically unfettered by these things. And that was what I thought was just really masterful plotting mixed with
also, I think
the journal, which is the main thing we're doing here.
What is also, I think, the third prong of that is them getting to Mars in like issue 8 or whatever, because when you get there, you don't know that there's going to be this whole new species of sentient life of abandoned rovers there. So you get to Mars and you're like, well, we got multiple issues of the series left. Like, what are we
Right.
doing? What's it about?
Right. When he
So
like
yeah,
steps
yeah,
off the
yeah,
ship and he's like, it's the
yeah,
last day of my life, and there's two
yeah.
more issues. You're like,
Yeah, you're
what?
like, wait, what? Yeah, like, so the idea that this one final twist of him dealing with, this last added bit of all the discarded and abandoned rovers, of all the machinery we've sent up to Mars, and using that as one final kind of funhouse mirror reflection back on humanity, on society. So yeah, that
And
other
yet
kind
you
of,
also get a Jurassic Park thing of like life finds a way. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
these bots shouldn't survive, but now they're reproducing. Like they're
yes,
extending into
yeah,
the next generation,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is,
yeah.
shout out to Becky Chambers, the Monk and Robot series, does a very similar beat. And I think at least the first one would have come before this. And I feel pretty certain Mark Russell would read Becky Chambers,
It's possible. But
the writer.
I like that this book, that he kind of he does go out of his way to set up conflict, potential conflict, and then it goes away.
But
Like
it
I said,
shows how meaningless all of that human conflict is in the
it,
face of death, right?
100%,
Yeah.
because what happens after the that corporate spy comes in and is rustled off. Like, Roy's just kind of like, huh, well, that was weird, basically,
Right.
and then
What else
and
can you
then
do?
and then when the other ships come and he basically disables them with the fire extinguisher trick. He has that moment where he's talking back with one of the doctors on Earth, and he has a realization that, like, I guess technically I killed them, but also, like, just like me, they were dead already, you know? And when it's
Right.
done, once again, he's just like, well, how's the thing that happened? Like, this idea of potentially setting up conflict, the kind of thing that you are programmed to expect when you're presented with a story like this. There has to be some level of conflict. It can't just be a person alone on a ship going to Mars, except that's exactly what the book ends up being. You know, I, I was having this thought recently, and I don't know if it's like when you buy a new car situation, and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere you go.
Oh yeah.
It's not because that car all of a sudden is more prevalent. It's because you're more aware of it. And I don't know if there's that situation, but I think I've seen all or part of The Martian 7 or 8 times in the past week and a half. Like, it's just been
Hmm.
on either HBO or Showtime or whatever, and also been on, like, maybe FX or something like that as well. And if it's just like, that's a movie that I absolutely love. I think it's done so well that I can jump in anywhere, like at any point in time. If it's like, I don't care what it is, I'm not going to stop and I'll watch it and end up watching the back half of the movie or whatever, the back 2/3 of the movie. But that is a movie that obviously is very much the epitome of what we're talking about, his Lonely Sci-Fi, but it also has series of conflicts, because the whole kind of ethos of that book is like, you got to solve a problem, then the next one, then the next one, and so even though nothing is tragic, nothing is fatal, nothing is catastrophic, it's just a series of problems and issues to solve and work through. And I feel like what Russell and Meli did here is that, like, they presented the potential for that. They showed what the problem is, and then it goes away. Like, they never
Right.
actually, he never actually asked, like, him going on, like, the EVA spacewalk to launch the fire extinguishers at those other ships is, like, the most conflict that is there. And that's just him going out there and then, like, basically, like, sending drones out and magnetically sticking them to the other ships. Like, that's all
Right.
the action there is.
I mean, I think the
There
way
is
I
no
would
action.
say it, I was thinking about this when I was reading. I was like, The Martian is the American version of this. And I think maybe the other way to say it is that Traveling to Mars is if The Martian had been written by someone in France. Like, this is it's a more cynical, philosophically oriented, culture that like the the American spin is like, yeah, I'm in a tough spot, but through a lot of grit and optimism and a plucky attitude, I'm going to dig myself out of this thing. And that's, Matt Damon's character, slash every character Andy Weir writes. And I love him. But I think a more cynical Western European, you could call it maybe even British or German or something like that. But I think, a lot of other cultures that don't have that American exceptionalism like that to the really crazy extreme would just be like, yeah, so we're all kind of doomed, so we'll just find meaning in what we can and just go gracefully into the night. I think that's more of the Mark Russell version here.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. I mean, I mean, the point of the book is clearly just a meditation on life and existence. It's
but
all
you would
just
sell
existentialism.
I mean, I'm sure you didn't sell that many of these, but you would sell a lot fewer of them had he just published a journal, of his own essays or whatever. I think turning it into a narrative and having a compelling story out of it.
You need the framing, and I think this is where I think. Well, I want to shout out Roberto Meli and the colorist whose name is. Hold on, I got to scroll down here because it's another
that
wildly
is
Italian name.
Chiara di Francia.
Francia, yes, Chiara di Francia.
Yeah.
Again, wildly Italian book, but I really enjoy what they did with the art. I like that there was there was a nice switch between our current day Roy on the ship and everything like that, and even dealing before he leaves, and that there was like a subtle character shift in the way characters were designed for his memories. I like that there was a subtle difference there. Obviously, I think they did a little bit with the color. Maybe it's a little more muted. The idea that it's hazy memory or things like that. But the idea that the character design, it helps that the way they draw Roy in current day is just like he's pretty haggard, like in general, like he's not in great shape, regardless of having cancer and being alone on a spaceship. He's not in great shape. He's not doing good. So you get that reflected in I think his posture, the way he sits, the way they draw him, like walking and moving through the spaceship. You just get a sense of what this guy, like, kind of what his whole deal is about, and you kind of understand why someone like this would be not only like kind of literally at the end of his rope, but also be like, yeah, sure, I'll do this. It's like, you want me to, guy in anyway, might as well do something worthwhile. Or what he seems is worthwhile, I think you get that across just in the way they show, like, physically show the character on the page, and I think there was a good synergy with Mark Russell's writing there, because this is a book that easily could have been done by kind of one of his other kind of more frequent collaborators, someone like Steve Pugh, who we did the Flintstones with. I think, this is a book that it would have felt very similar there, I think, in terms of
Mike
Deodato
has certainly proven that he can draw emotion on static robot faces. Which I still remember that letter in the back of Not All Robots of like all of the robots had the same face, but I have to convey different emotions with them. But they don't have eyebrows, they don't have eyes. So
I do think though, I do think though, Deoda's, his human characters tend to be a little more on the like photorealistic side.
Yes.
So I don't know if that might have fit, but you're absolutely right. Him doing all the rovers in their various states of distress and repair, up on Mars, I think he would have been fantastic with that. But I do think when we get to Mars there, I think what Meli did, and I think some of the colors they did, because obviously everything's got to be kind of a reddish haze there because it's Mars. So yeah, no, but I think there is, I don't want to say like I wasn't blown away by his art, because there was something, the style, and I really think the way, because it is, we're following one person, right? Essentially one human throughout most of the story here. And I do think the way that they drew Roy lounging around, that's not the right word, just him living, existing on the ship. Again, the way he's sitting on the chairs, laying on the bed, everything about it just conveys the kind of person that he is.
Yeah.
Just with his posture, his body structure, his frame, everything about that. I think they did a great job in that, knowing that you're spending 85% of this book looking at one person, and just surrounded by a couple of little robots. That your focal point is just going to be on him. That's all you're going to see. And I think also knowing too, I have to imagine so many of these scripts, like it's all narration, right? So like,
right.
They're, in terms of what's happening, like around the dialogue, what's he doing around the ship and things like that. I imagine that's all just like almost like stage direction, on this page here, this panel here, blah, 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 blah. Because there isn't, there are long stretches where there's no actual dialogue, where Roy isn't interacting verbally with anything. You're just watching his actions. And you're having to illustrate the story and tell the story while you're getting narration from Roy's inner monologue.
Right.
So there isn't a direct reference to what is specifically, not always, not a direct reference to what's specifically happening on that page in that moment of time. So yeah, I imagine there's a challenge there in terms of, how do we sync up what's happening on the page with whatever thoughts we're going to be reading from Roy's point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. I failed to comment on the art, but I always am impressed when an artist has this particular task of Roy himself does sketches.
Yeah.
And he has a sketch of himself on the first page, a sketch of his father in the first issue, a sketch of Candace.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy's sketches don't exactly look like the rest of the art, which means like you're drawing within the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always just kind of a next level touch. Actually, Candace is also in the first issue. He just has a younger drawing of her there.
Yeah. But that actually jumps ahead something else I had here about the letterer, Mattia Gentili. Sure, Mattia Gentili. Because I was wondering about that, because there are times when we're reading his journal and we're actually reading a page of the journal.
Right.
Where
especially that Candace letter where it hops back and forth.
Well, that there, and there are multiple times in where we see Roy's journal where the panel is just a close up of the journal, and because sometimes when you see that in comics, it's repeating the text in the text box in the narration boxes. Like they're saying this is what it is on the page, but this is what you're actually reading. The way they present it here is that's the next step, that those are the next pages in his journal, and you actually need to read that. And I'm curious if that was an art choice or a letterer choice, because I think back to our conversation with Sarah Gailey. We asked them about
all the decor and the
Well, Eat the Rich.
Okay, yeah.
Anytime there were sound effects outside of word bubbles, and they said that was the artist, that was Pius Bach, that wasn't the letterer. Because I know with a book like Saga, Phonographics does all the lettering there, but anytime there is a sound effect, anything that is in the panel there, that's Fiona Staples. So, it always, I'm sure it depends, depending on the creative team and what their working relationship is, but with specific regard to something like a journal, where it isn't just a visual effect, like in Eat the Rich, that anytime there were words like around the character's head or whatnot that weren't sound effects, but they were drawn outside of a dialogue box, a word balloon or a narration box, it was just for artistic effect.
Right.
It served no other purpose other than for the reader. Here, we're actually reading someone's writing, reading letters on a page. So I'm curious about that. If that was a letterer move or if that was, the artist having to do that. Because that handwriting is very well scripted. Obviously it's a font meant to look handwritten, but I'm always curious like that when you have handwriting, writing within the story, like diegetic writing. Who's responsible for that? Who takes charge on that? Does the artist just draw a blank page and the artist and then the letter comes back in to fill in or whatnot? Again, I'm always curious about that, and you talking about the sketches reminded me of that, because I think those kind of go hand in hand in terms of when you're dealing with something that's in world, media
Right.
in world
Yeah.
versus something just for the reader.
Okay. So you read this in trade, and I'm guessing this is something that didn't get carried over to trade. Do you have any of the single issues?
I know I have all the single issues
Okay, you do.
digitally. When I first
Oh,
read it,
digitally.
when
Okay.
when I first read it, I caught up to issue 10 before the release of issue 11, the first time. But rereading it this time, I went and got the trade, and read it that way for this reread.
Uh, okay. So have you noticed that there is a quote on the back of each issue?
Yes, but that
Okay.
is not included in the
Yeah, I was like, there's no way that would
yeah,
be collected in
yeah,
a trade.
yeah.
And I kind of wonder, so they're not like the best, most meaningful quotes that I would have necessarily pulled. They feel like promo for in the comic shop, like if it's sitting on the rack.
That makes sense. Yeah.
The back of the first issue says my life was never very interesting, and it shows him, in his underwear in a spaceship with a
Yeah.
robot, and it's like, well, like that's a pretty interesting premise. You know, issue 2 is just morning fellows, but some of them get pretty good. The third one shows him laughing. It's where the robots learn the chicken laughing sound.
Oh yeah,
Watching
the
the movie
buck
with
buck
them.
buck. Yeah.
And it says immortality is, of course, a slippery concept. And I'm like, okay, that's a pretty intriguing back cover. And it's interesting because I just never really thought of how wasted back covers often are. I mean, a lot of times in Big Two, they're advertisements.
Well, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But a fair amount of creator-owned stuff do similar things like that, where they may not have art from the page from the interior with it, but there are a handful I can think of that pull quotes from the back. I think Monstrous does that. Well, yeah, well, they'll just pull a line out and that'll be on the back cover there. Just in like fancy text or something like that. But that's much more of a creator-owned thing, definitely.
yeah, because you control it cover to cover. I mean, that's
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
main thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
issue 7, the quote is, and it starts with an ellipsis, but it says, "A letter to the universe no one will ever read." And I'm like,
Yes.
the that's the tagline. That's the elevator pitch for this book, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Mhm. Well, and what I love about that quote too, hold on, I think I have that whole.
And the robot's handing him a snow cone. So
Yes.
it's
Well,
like
yeah, yeah.
it's just constantly this juxtaposition of the silliest situations with the heaviest quotes that Mark does so well, and everything is just perfectly in balance throughout the entire story.
Yeah, no, I have that whole page there. It starts, said, but who knows? Maybe that's just wishful thinking. It could be that our collective fate will be the same as this book. Maybe that's all any of us are, a letter to the universe that no one will ever read. So he's talking about that in terms of the physical representation of his journal that he's going to leave on Mars, but also like he's musing on the idea of, is that the sum total of one's life, of anyone's life? Is all anyone's life is ultimately is it meaningless because no one will read it, or is it meaningless that because that it happened?
Right.
It's the idea of if it's infinite, if this goes on, what is one small speck of a person's life? If there's at some point it'll be there's if there's no one there recording it to see it and watch it and appreciate it as it happening, does that matter at all? And I think that's an interesting juxtaposition, and it's the kind of question that he throws out there, that Mark Russell throws out to the reader, that's just meant to make you think. He's not out here saying that like nothing. He's not saying either way that it is meaningless or it has meaning in that. It's up to the reader to decide and let them reflect on what that idea might mean to them. which I
Well,
think is fascinating that he does it over and over again.
yeah, and I think I think in his mind, these are the questions he wrestles with,
Hmm.
and each time he writes a book, he's running a little simulation in his head of like,
I like
okay,
that. Yeah.
if this were the circumstance of the world and I was this guy Roy,
Yeah.
would I conclude that there's a God or not? Would I conclude that there's meaning or not? You know, he's like, like what would ring emotionally resonant, logically true, based
Yeah.
on intellect and emotion, based on circumstance and yada yada yada. And
In
he's
this
just
situation I've created.
correct. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
he's just doing that again, and I think that's actually what most writers are doing. They're
Oh yeah.
asking a lot of the same questions for their entire
Yeah.
career.
Hmm.
Tom King, another great example of a guy
Hmm.
who's asking a lot of the same basic questions, but just keeps finding different circumstances to ask them in.
Hmm.
And the questions are really good. I
Yeah.
mean, like the questions you ask are what make you a great writer, and that's what makes Mark great, in my opinion.
I'd agree on that. Yeah.
I think Mark is still, um, like it still baffles me that I can walk into comic shops and talk about Mark Russell, and people are like, "Who? What's he written?" And I'm like, he's actually done big two stuff now. He's done, he's not, he wasn't like the Batman writer or the Spider-Man writer, but like he's been around the block enough. But I think he's still underappreciated for how talented he is.
Well, I mean, well, it's because he's still relatively unknown. Like that's just the fact of the matter in terms of the mainstream comic reader. They're not going to know who he is, because he has not written the type of books that the average person walks in who's buying Spider-Man and Batman are going to read. Even like his Batman Dark Age or his Superman Space, like those aren't books that the average person is going to read.
Right.
That's not something they're going to pick up, which I think you and I both agree is to their detriment. But like his stuff isn't for everyone, which I get, but I think it could be for a larger audience of people if they had exposure to him. I'm not going to knock him for doing this, but I think maybe a potential issue is that he writes for a lot of different publishers. A lot of them are real small publishers.
That's true.
You
Yeah,
know?
he's harder to find because
Like if
we followed him to AWA,
yeah,
DC, and a Blaze.
yeah, and like if his books at Ahoy, if his books at AWA, like if those were all image books, he automatically has a bigger profile, like
Right.
immediately. If those are image books, he has a bigger profile because there are people who are going to look at every image, number one, because they have an idea of what that's supposed to be. Folks aren't searching out a Blaze or Ahoy or AWA unless they already know about it. And if they already know about it, they probably already know who Mark Russell is. So it's very much a snake eating its tail kind of thing. It's a chicken egg situation of if you're someone who is checking out these incredibly small press creator-owned books, you probably already know who Mark Russell is.
Yes, that's fair. That's extremely fair.
Yeah.
If you didn't, if a Blaze did not exist, whose house style do you think this would match? You said image, and I think that's a fair guess.
Yeah. Well,
looking at it, reading it, I'm like, this feels like this could have been like, 2010s Vertigo era.
No, it's a little too absurd for that. It's
Oh,
a
really?
little too
Okay.
absurd. I think that this could have been a dark horse book, as it is right now.
Sure. Yeah.
This very much could have been a dark horse book.
A lot less so. Boom. And Image has started to steer away from this type of book in my exposure. Maybe it's not that they're steering away, but they've saturated more and more of their market with horror because I think they're kind of following like Boom's success.
I think that this could, because anything can be an image book. I do think that, but outside of that,
agree.
Outside of that, this feels like it could be a dark horse book. Like pretty much no problem there. In the current landscape of Boom, probably not early Boom when it was just like a total free for all. The first like 10 some odd years of Boom, no problem. But current day when this book came out, starting in 2022, I think.
Well, that is worth noting that there was no Vertigo in 2022. So
but
that's
I'm
the
saying like
other reason my
yeah,
theory is invalid.
yeah, it's a little too absurd. Not saying there aren't funny books or weird books coming out of Vertigo. Don't know if it would have fit that right there. But I any of the small press like this fits perfectly with his books at Ahoy, like Second Coming and Billionaire Island and things like that. All those books are of a similar flavor, and all of them would have made sense if they were all like if he had his own imprint over at Dark Horse or something like that. You
Yeah.
know, if he had his own imprint there, and all of his books came out like that, and that's one of those things that potentially could increase his readership because Dark Horse is still a larger name in comic publishing versus a Blaze.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All
So,
right. Do you have any nits to pick with this book?
do I have any nits to pick?
Because I have one.
I think my one nit would be knowing that it was 12 and it got down to 11. There's a version of the story where it probably could have been 10 or maybe even like 8. I think you could have done it in 8.
You could have done it in 8. I was going to say
Yeah.
possibly 5 or 6. If you cut out a lot of the like the hostage stuff and the space battle stuff, if it's just him journaling, but I think that's a pretty dry book.
It is pretty dry because you can't.
But just
you can't
the journal,
lose,
you could have
you
knocked
can't
out in 5 or
lose the
6.
stuff on Mars. So he has to get to Mars before the end of the series. So yeah, you could tighten 5 or 6 would be really difficult. I can see it though. I agree, but there's probably like 8 total bangers. So if you condense it a little bit and make it 8, I think, and I don't even know if that's a nit or not. That may not even be a nit. That's more just an observation because I have no problem with the length. I didn't feel like it was padded.
And it's
I'm just saying,
pretty quick read for how heavy it is.
I think that's because it's mostly narration.
Right.
You're not reading a lot of dialogue. And when you do get it, you kind of get it in chunks, right? Like here's a transmission from Earth. And you read that. And then here's him talking to Albert or when he gets on Mars, So it's a lot of narration where you can read his thoughts and then glance at the artwork. So I think it does move very quickly. So yeah, I would say that's a nit for me because I don't feel like it was the wrong length. But I do think there is a version of this book that's super, super tight at like 8 issues.
That's fair.
Yeah. What was yours? You said you had one.
Yeah, his final speech at the end, I liked it, didn't love it. Like I don't think he totally nailed it.
Oh, I was gonna say like, well, so was it not sentimental enough? Was it too like?
Well, that's the thing is like the book has like all of this, like some authors get so dark that when they try to do something sentimental at the end to like balance it out,
feels super wrong. Yeah.
It feels super wrong. That's not this because like his thoughts about Candace and his mother have been so positive all throughout that there has been this sentiment in the character all along. And he has this super sentimental morning reading, like crying.
That last letter. Yeah.
Yeah. The last letter from Candace. Great gift from the corporate sponsor, by the way. If anything, that might be the least believable part of the story, is that they would actually do something that thoughtful, especially when you consider the video collection they gave him to watch.
Yes,
the Kangaroo, whatever.
Kangaroo Kid or whatever it was, yeah.
But all of this to say, when you think that this is his Mount Sinai for the robots, and what he's saying will be their scripture, for generations and generations, like he is the god of Mars, delivering to the new species there. I loved, since you're going to be stuck here together for the foreseeable future, you're probably going to want to be forthcoming with apologies. If you're anything like your creators, you should be ready to apologize often and without reservation. I absolutely love that. Like I would get that on a shirt. And you may not want to hear it from us for a while, or you may not hear from us for a while, but that's not because we don't love you. In fact, just let your creators admire you from afar. Like proud but dysfunctional parents. I believe there's a life worth leading. Go out there and find it. Most importantly, I need you all to understand this. Your mission on behalf of the creators is over in gratitude for all the data, da, da, da. So find something else to do with your life, something that makes sense to you. If you want to make us happy, then go out there in the sandstorms and fix each other, yada, yada, yada. That's all we can ask of anyone. I'm like, on one hand, it feels a little like starts really strong, kind of devolves into generic self-help mush. But on the other hand, what are we expecting from Roy Livingston? Like,
That's exactly what I was going to say.
That's the fair point.
Yeah.
But then he gives what I would consider almost like a James Gunn sign-off line. I'll leave you with the Earth's most holiest ancient blessing. Good luck. It feels like something Star-Lord would say in a James Gunn movie.
I felt that last bit was meant to be like Roy being like, crushed it. And the reader being like, nope, didn't need that one. You know what I'm saying? Like, I thought that was perfectly in character. I can see though. Well, I can see what you're saying though. Like
the best is that every bot's saying bok 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 bok.
How would it read though if in that moment he gave like the most inspirational speech, like the most perfect speech?
I would say
that absolutely crushed it. The kind of thing that Mark Russell can do because he's done it in other places.
Right.
Like he's had Fred Flintstone did that, give some speeches like that, and that's also a character that's meant to be kind of dim. So I guess it just kind of
I think it's fair. It's a matter of what you accept, but since his sign off has to also serve as Mark Russell's sign off of like, here are my concluding thoughts for the book. We technically get the journal, which is
that's what I was going to say.
There
is still the final words are the final pages of his journal, which are much more eloquent as they have been throughout the entire series. Like Roy's inner thoughts, the diaries, the explorations that he's kind of dealing with are far more elevated than his actual like, I got to give a speech here. So it is more fitting for the reader that the actual last words come from the diary, and those are a little more. I was going to say fitting. That isn't the right word, but you know what I'm saying there, right? Like that his diary lands a little more securely with kind of the themes and the overall vibe of the book than his actual last words to the robots.
Yeah. It also seems like he could have just given the journal to the robots who would have all committed to memory, no problem. And then it would have not been dependent on paper or anything like that. But I'm not sure he's convinced of the value of what he's written.
Well, clearly not. Yeah. He leaves it in the igloo cooler with the idea that maybe it'll be found. Like he goes out of its way.
Now that's interesting because I thought he did that because the igloo cooler is plastic. And he was told, if anything of us survives, it's going to be plastic.
That's what I'm saying. He put it in the cooler and he specifically put it like in a small crevice between the rocks that it kind of fit into. So maybe it wouldn't get too battered it would get covered by sand eventually, maybe depending on the storms. But like it was unclear exactly what his hope for that would be. That like the humans who eventually show up to mine the non-existing natural gas, like, are they meant to find it? I don't know.
And they were really closing in, like right at the end of that. Like,
well, I don't know. I don't know what that time frame was supposed to be like.
I suspect they would have had equipment on the way there.
Shortly after Roy. So when he gets there first,
why wouldn't you?
That's true. There's no reason to wait for the
green light. If nothing else, if you're the second company there and you've got equipment on the ground, you can sell that equipment to the company for a premium.
Yeah. And if Roy somehow didn't make it there, then whoever's next, like if you're the beef company and you send Roy up there and then 2 weeks later you send your mining equipment, if Roy doesn't make it and you're still kind of in the lead, your second ship becomes your first ship now, right?
Right.
You land on Mars and claim it for yourself and start drilling. So they probably wouldn't have waited for a transmission. That's true. That makes sense. So
Um, but all that say, even with my one nit to pick, like there's an in-story explanation of it. I think I just wanted a little finer point with Mark's thoughts in conclusion, but I think it's pretty satisfying, and I still gave it a 5 out of 5 stars.
I think it's a satisfying ending because again, he's able to do that thing again. You balance the absurdity and kind of the wildness of like all these rovers have they already had some level of sentience to begin with, and then managed to survive and form this whole new species here. You get that absurdness of it, and them immediately having like existential crises of like, did I anger my creators? Why did they stop talking to me? All they basically gave the rovers religion.
Right.
In terms of thinking of that way of their creators and all this, and it's managing to take that kind of absurd situation and once again find like an incredible amount of heart and like pathos in it, which he's able to do in these absurd situations that he creates. I think that is one of his great skills in terms of giving social commentary, that he does. I think, even though he's not trying to be a moralist, I don't think he's trying to be a downer about things. I think a lot of his books are being like,
Yeah.
we got problems and there are things to think about and there are things to worry about, but like there's a way to get through it. Like there's a way to think about and your life and your situation and the people around you, to help make things get better. And I don't think his books are ever meant to be driven by despair, especially the ones that are maybe the ones that are like hyper focused on a certain class of people, like in like Rumpus Room, A Billionaire Island or something like that. But like Flintstones and I think specifically Traveling to Mars, where he's shining that light back on all of society. I think it's almost like he can't help but ultimately be hopeful. That's my read on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's always been his thing, is he can't help but be hopeful.
Yeah.
And I think I really respect him for that, because
It's easy to be cynical.
cynicism is so easy.
Yeah.
I think all of the time, this probably just says more about my age than anything, but whatever. I think all of the time about the last episode of the late night show, or the Tonight Show, that Conan O'Brien did. And, it was his dream job. He'd been promised it for 5 years. He worked for it his entire life. He got it for 9 months.
Yeah.
And in his sign off, this like very goofy man made a very earnest plea with his fans, saying like, I know you're young, you're fans of mine, I love you, I appreciate you, but please don't become cynical. Like, so much good can happen to you in this life. Like, and this was an amazing thing for me, and I'm not done, being Conan O'Brien yet, just because this thing is ending. So please don't, there's so much good that can happen if you stay positive and keep, keep putting one foot after the other, is basically it. And really powerful stuff. He's a sharp guy, but
of course. Yeah. Yeah.
He just very rarely lets down the goofball persona.
Well, and I think specifically Mark Russell, we talk about it easy to be cynical. Like when you read his books, like 80% of it seems like a cynical look at the world.
Exactly.
Like so you see on the page how easy it can be and how easy it would be for his characters to do that, because he's showing all of the flaws of society that we all know are there, but he's like pointing a stick at and be like, hey, look at this one, and over here, look at this too. Hey, that thing we do here, that's not so great. He's pointing out all these things, and it's easy to look at that and come away with cynical towards humanity and human nature and society. But he always finds a way to put a spin on it, to be like, don't let this define you, don't let this drag you down. And I think he does it in a way that isn't super saccharine, right? That's not super sappy and over the top. I think he moves very deftly around that to say that the world is cynical, maybe, but possibly your best bet is to navigate it by not being cynical. You know,
Yeah, I think
if
he
there's a theme, yeah, it feels like that.
well, and I think the reason I pick up every book he writes is because I feel like I see you, Mark Russell. Like you're not as cynical as you would like me to think you are.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Like I think feeling like I get him on that level,
yeah,
um, just makes it that much more satisfying when he drags you through all of these cynical scenarios and dark thoughts,
yep,
and he still lands the plane, and
yeah.
it's
Comes back
like,
on the other
you
side.
know,
Yep,
like,
yep.
uh, like there's the line about how like there are so many miracles around us we're just too bored to notice them. Like who's ever who's ever
Yeah.
thought or said that before? But when he says it, he's done the like he's shown you receipts, like he's done
Mhm.
the work to get you there. And it's like, yeah, all
And
of
it
these
makes sense. Yeah,
little amazing things
yeah. It
that
doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it's not cheesy and unearned. Like bad
yeah,
movies will have a line like that.
yeah.
Like that could be the line from a Hallmark movie
Mhm.
about, you know, a barista that was too addicted to their phone and fell in love
Yeah,
with someone wearing flannel or something like that.
yeah.
But coming from Mark Russell in this context, it's insanely great.
Yeah, and that's just like one of like a dozen or so just like killer lines that he has. I unearned it, sorry, it did not feel so it was earned. Those lines feeling earned, I think shows the skill that he has as a writer, that when you get them, they land the way they're supposed to, and very, very rarely does he land one, does he give one, and you kind of groan at it, you know? You know,
Yeah, I've never had a groaner from him other
I'm
than
saying, well,
occasional
I'm saying,
dad joke type groaners.
he, I can't guarantee you he's batting 1,000, but like, you know, he's up there. But for the most part, yeah, when those come up, when those kind of larger moments, because it's also very obvious when it's meant to be a line because of the often the way that they choose to break up the narration boxes or the dialogue boxes. You know, it's meant like this is the kicker line. You know, we're going to put this by itself. So he knows what he's doing. You know, he understands that it's not just what he's written, it's the order and the way in which you read it on the page. And if he wants to have a killer line there, like it's probably going to be at the bottom of the page in the bottom right hand corner after you've read a block of dialogue above it, you know? So there's a natural break there as you look at the art, and then you get that killer one liner. So we know he knows he's setting up a moment. But yeah, again, so rarely do they come off as groaners. They come off like they are meant to be there, and you feel it. You feel the weight that you're supposed to feel, I think, that he wants you to feel as a reader.
Yeah.
As opposed to them coming off as feeling cheap.
Yeah. Anything else you want to hit on in this book? We're coming up at about our usual time,
I
which I'm
think
actually impressed. I mean, again, I could have done 75 minutes of one-liners from this book.
I think the last thing I want to talk about here is looking back, kind of tying this in overall into the theme
Sure.
we have going on, and specifically looking back at Sentient, and the way that the isolation and maybe not so much specifically the relationship to robotics and specifically AI, but just the idea of what that view of kind of isolation in space is versus what we have here. You know, Sentient very much is an action book, right? It's people in an unfamiliar situation who have to step up and be the thing that they're either not ready to be or were never supposed to be. You know, it's a bunch of children having to run the ship and then defend the ship, you know, versus what we have in Traveling to Mars, which is boredom, you know, it's this actual isolation, but also
Right.
this guy's like, yeah, I'm kind of cool with that. You know, he's someone that doesn't have to go out. He's someone that probably would have been home anyway on his own. So he doesn't feel alone. Yeah, he's got those two robots with him. He's got Albert and the one I'm forgetting right now. But the isolation, the loneliness, the separation isn't what gives him pause, right? The idea that the idea of him being alone on the ship for 6 months, that actually isn't what any of his existential crisis comes from.
Right.
You know, when so much of, I think, sci-fi stories about this, it becomes about the isolation. It's someone kind of going stir crazy and getting cabin fever. It's about, I'm trapped here. I can't go anywhere else. This is all I have. It's all routine. And what they've given us here is a character in Roy who's just like, yeah, this is what I do. You know, it's what I got to do. Scrub the air. It's a little stale, and that's it. You know, maybe plays the guitar a little bit, writes in his journal a little bit, and it watches the same 6 movies over and over again. You know, the isolation isn't what it's actually about, and I think that's an interesting twist on this type of story. Because again, we mentioned a story like The Martian, or you mentioned Project Hail Mary, those two great books from Andy Weir. The isolation is part of it, right? And what the isolation does, and what kind of effect that has on the character.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, in those stories, you also have a diary aspect, right? Whether it's recordings or logs or whatnot, and you see how the isolation begins to affect the character and what that and the choices they make and the actions they take. That's absent here for Roy. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the two things stand out to me. One, it shows that we are so lonely, we will always be trying to program things to make us not lonely. In both cases, there's some robot/AI companion.
Sure.
And, you know, in Sentient, there were even other people around, but you needed something you programmed in order to not feel lonely.
Yeah.
But I think the difference is here, I think he would have described himself as a lonely guy on Earth.
Yes.
And didn't realize how many people he had around him that he cared about until his access to them was gone. And I think that's the loneliness, like space exposes the loneliness in that sense. But also for him, the Lonely Sci-Fi team is really about, he's writing words on paper that presumably no being will ever see because of the vastness of space. And that's really the loneliness of space. It's like whatever he's thinking, feeling, nothing for millions of miles around him care. And that's lonely.
Never care.
Whether you feel lonely or not, that is lonely.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's one thing that I think it's one of the reflections, one of the memories of something that he was talking to Candace about, the idea of the vastness of space, right? The enormity, the eternalness, the of space and time. And when you think about that, what is one person's life? You know, what does it mean for that in the scope of never ending, of forever? Does that make whether that person lives a lonely life or has all these connections, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? And being alone on the ship in space is what gives Roy the space to think about and examine those thoughts and feelings, and also at the same time also be a physical representation of that as well. You know, even though again, that actually isn't what the book is representing, is talking about. His actual isolation isn't what the story is about. It is the larger existential view of loneliness and or perceived loneliness even. You know, it's the examination of the idea versus the physical representation. Because you're right. This is a guy who would have been totally comfortable and probably, and I think was in his life on Earth, being alone. You know, does that mean he was specifically lonely? You know, because those things aren't necessarily one-to-one. He may have thought that, and you're right. Once he was on that ship and blasted off, his immediate reaction was like, nope, I made a mistake, because he was thinking about, I didn't get to say goodbye to my mom, didn't get to reconnect at
Right.
all with Candace. There was all these things there that he immediately thought about. Oh wait, there are these people in my life that I have connection with, or maybe not beholden to, but you know what I'm saying there. Like that, those are the first thoughts that came to his mind once he took off from the space elevator. So yeah, giving him time and room to examine that is what the book is about. I think that's what they want. That environment, that setting, the story construct is the kind of space they want to give the reader to think about in terms of how the reader views themselves within the space of their own life and the people
Yeah.
around them and the connections and all that. And doing it in this lone person on a journey, on a one-way journey, that in and of itself, I think, is a pretty standard sci-fi way to examine these ideas. But I think the presentation that Russell and Meli ultimately went with is what makes this book stand out.
Totally agree. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, again, a 5 out of 5 book. It's where everything came together. Every aspect of the creative team worked. I didn't know I could be so satisfied with an 11 issue run.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've said, I think I have not probably said it in a long time, but I typically, if you just ask me what the ideal comic run is, I've always said 12 issues. Like a 12 issue, maxi series or whatever you want to call it, tends to be my bread and butter. Like I'll do those all day long. And I think there are writers who, like Tom King, for instance, I think does absolutely his best work in the maxi series format.
Yeah.
Like I like him always. I don't care for him as much in long ongoing forms. And even in like with small sample size, but in like brief one shot things, I'm not as big on him. He needs a little space to breathe, but he also can drag things out a little bit or ramble. So I like having the hard end on things. And I think this was the most oxygen I've seen Mark Russell get, because most of the things I read from him are 6 issues where you just wish he had a little bit more. I guess not most, but many. I guess most of what I've read tend to be one trade. And I think technically this is one trade, but 11 issues ostensibly is 2 trades.
But there is no real natural break in the story, like there's no like, oh, this is the end of the first arc. And is it, like that,
right. Yeah.
That doesn't really exist.
It's one arc.
Yeah. I think it's very much meant to be presented as just one story, whether it was, again, 10, 11, 12 issues, something like that. But no, I think going back to what we said at the beginning, the Flintstones will always be my number one favorite Mark Russell written comic, but I think this is easily number 2. And it's that cop-out argument of like, Flintstones is my favorite, but Traveling to Mars is probably the best. It's that super easy totally out. But I think that this is a kind of book he could only have written after he's written all the other stuff he's done, after he's kind of processed that and got some of those initial ideas out. And this is not to say like a magnum opus for him, but like I think it's pretty darn close, because I think this brings in a lot of the ideas that he touches on in Flintstones and Not All Robots and Billionaire Island and stuff like that. If you've read all of those books, which I have, there's a way to look at this book that it's a culmination of kind of all those ideas, funneled just into one story, funneled through one guy in Roy Livingston and his thoughts. You're getting kind of all that there as he's able to process all that together. And I think looking at it from that view, I think is really, really interesting. And the idea that they chose to tell it in this format, in this very standard lone man in space trope, take an idea that is known and infuse it with that level of commentary and satire, I think is like the most Mark Russell thing ever.
Well, the last thing I'll add is that Mark seems to have a very high view of the everyman, like on
Yes. Oh
some
yeah.
level.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think that's particularly popular right now. I think there's very good reason to think the average person in our society is quite stupid. The evidence is more compelling each day. Yet Mark will take an everyman character like a Fred Flintstone or like a Roy Livingston and show you like if you put this person in the right situation, in the right circumstances, the right things happen to them in the right order, you will see them scratch the surface and like dig a little deeper. And they have the capacity for this.
Well,
Um,
I think
and so I think it's a very hopeful depiction of humanity,
absolutely because
one person at a time.
it's an idealized version of the Everman because we look at the world now oftentimes the Everman not very smart but he also is not very smart the elites the ones who actually are different and the ones who think they're different they're
Right.
also not very smart either so there is this ideal version of just like this is the regular dude just trying to get by and you know what he may not even really be getting by. You know, life has thrown him nothing but curveballs and he's missed every single one of them. And, but even in this, even with this kind of person, in this station here, you can still find hope. And if that person can do it, then the next person can do it. And the next person can do it and things like that. And so I agree. I think that's a reason why he often chooses these type of characters to be his protagonists. And so many of his antagonists tend to be the corporate billionaires, you know? And again, I know those seem like easy targets, especially now, and they are easy targets, but it's meaningless or it can be meaningless if the people against them, the characters against them, aren't someone that you can actually empathize with because they feel like a potentially real person there, you know, because all the billionaires, all the people he's satirizing, like they're all caricatures. Like everyone at the beef company, like they're all caricatures.
Right.
They're not real people, but everyone knows who they are and what they represent. There has to be a realness in Roy, and I think you find that. I think calling out his version of Fred Flintstone is the same thing. Fred is just trying to get by in the world. You know, things are changing around here. He has no idea what's happening. The dude is just trying to get through the day, trying to raise his daughter, trying to be a good husband to his wife. And like, he's not really doing great at it, but he's trying. And he
Right.
understands that he has to try. And he understands that by trying, that's what makes things better. And Roy comes to that similar conclusion, but maybe for him it was a little too late because he comes to it once he's by himself on his own and he comes to it and he puts those thoughts down like you said in a journal that'll probably never be seen or encountered to again by another human being another living person at all so that's this kind of sad undertone I think to Roy's story but it ends up being hopeful to us the reader because we get to read his words.
Yeah. Well, I'll leave it at that. Although I do think there will be more callbacks to this than anything else for the rest of the series because we got 2 books left.
We do, yeah. And
And
is it again different kinds? They're all different kinds of spins on the alone in space, lonely sci-fi, specifically space, and seeing kind of what everyone does with that prompt. You know, our next book, you know, is Gone, written and drawn by Jock from DSTLRY. It's 3 issues, 3 oversized, prestige, you know, magazine size issues. You can get it in a nice, beautiful hardcover as well. Completely different take on the idea of someone going off and being alone in space because they quickly find themselves not alone in space. So what does that mean? Because they're still separated from the thing that made them them. So it'd be exciting to get into it. Really looking forward to it. But I agree with you. I think from a benchmark standpoint, I think Traveling to Mars is indeed a high watermark for this type of story. This
yeah,
type of what you can do with this prompt is something like this if you have the right people behind it.
yeah. So grab Gone. Highly recommend a physical version just due to the shape
Yeah.
of the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
and Jock's art looks great. Jock's art looks great on the oversized page too.
I mean, that goes
beautiful.
without saying. Jock's art looks great to any medium, but
it does.
You don't want to compress that format size down to a tablet.
If you don't have to, yeah. If you can find it, if you can find it physically, it's gorgeous. I haven't seen the hardcover, but I've seen other distillery hardcovers that they've put out, and they're fabulous. I've got the single issues, but the deluxe hardcovers, the ones I've seen look absolutely gorgeous. So if you can find it, or find the single issues, that's recommended. But if you have to, it'll still look good on digital as well. Presuming you have a decent looking tablet to read it on.
And just because it may take you an extra beat to find it, Apocalyptic Girl is week 4 of this series.
Yeah.
So go ahead and get in line for that. Request it from your library, whatever you have to do, and hopefully you can track that one down, because I think that will be the hardest one to find. Not difficult, but it's not
more difficult than
reach. Like
more difficult than the previous three books will have been. So it's probably good looking out there, Mike, to get ahead of that one for 2 weeks from now.
All right, we will see you next Thursday for Gone by Jock from DSTLRY. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.
Peace.